and all of the NGOs that partner with the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development. I give you the commitment of the government. I ask that you would pray for the member for East Grand Bahama, the Minister of Finance, that his financial situation will be so blessed and augmented that we will be able to do more of the things that we have discussed. But the government supports you. The government supports zero tolerance to gender-based violence in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Angleston.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I want to join with the member for Southern Shores, the Minister responsible for Gender Affairs, in welcoming this fine group who are here with us this morning in this Parliament, the place where the laws are made and dominated by men. A few women are here. I think there are about 4 or 5 women in this Parliament. I wanted to add to the recognition of members in the gallery, Ruby Ann Cooper-Darling, who is the first woman in the history of this nation to represent a family out of Oh, the member for Exuma is pressuring me to say which island. Okay, the great island of Exuma. This is harassment. This is 16 days free of harassment, member. This is her old stomping ground, and she has kept her hand in, and we appreciate that she has continued her contribution. And I also want to recognize Stephanie Anwala, who is an old veteran. Ms. Anwala, please do stand. Stephanie Anwala is the constant in Zonta and has been and is very committed. I've had many private conversations with her, and I want to commend Zonta in general because they have studied the course on this issue about girls and women, and it has been uncompromising and uninterrupted and fervent and faithful, and for that I thank them. I also want to recognize that it is the anniversary of the first time women voted in this country, and or was it? Yes, the first time they voted. The right to vote, I think, came in February, and it's both events, the 16 days and commemorating the rights, the franchise for women, it's a celebration, but it's also a very somber time because I think that women have to always be cognizant that we have much road to cover, or much ground to cover, and that we must continue the sustained effort. We know that women continue to be, we know that we're the largest in the electorate, but we know also, though, despite that we continue to be most represented living in poverty. We continue to be represented, heading households singularly, raising children and facing all the challenges that come with that. And we continue to be those who are the targets most of domestic violence in homes, at risk in our own homes and with partners. We continue to be most vulnerable to sexual violence. And so these are very serious, devastating realities that we must keep in the fore of our minds and continue the struggle. I want to encourage, and please forgive me if I do, I want to encourage that you take your campaign more grassroots into working class communities where you're able to speak to young girls and women who are facing peculiar challenges, particularly those women living in poverty, and that you bring about an awareness, a sense of I don't like to use the word empowerment, but a sense that there are solutions to circumstances. And I think that when you take it more grassroots, I believe that you begin to see the ground shake and affect greater change. So I want to also commend the minister, which I said to him, I don't do that much, but I got to commend him and his team, Dr. Jacinta Higgs, who I said to her before we came into Parliament, They've been energized, high profile, and moving, and we appreciate that, and we want to encourage their work and to continue with that type of energy. And so, Mr. Speaker, I speak on behalf of the official opposition. We welcome you, we appreciate you, we thank you, we encourage you, and we ask you to count on our support. I believe the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, in San Salvador was with you at the church service. It was our symbolic, absolute commitment to the cause, and so count us in as your partners as you move forward in the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, honourable member. Honourable members, we have another group here with us this morning, but before I recognize that group, I wish to throw out a challenge to the men, male parliamentarians, to step forward and to support our women in this fight against violence to women and girls. You know, I'm from the island of Great Inagua, and I don't know, I guess a lot of the Family Island members who are here would agree with me. In my 60-plus years of being on this earth, I've never heard of such an incident or incidents that were discussed in Rawson Square, in Great Inagua, on most of our Family Islands. So it seems as if we have a major challenge here in New Providence. Maybe, I don't know how, if it extends to Grand Bahama, but the more populated areas. And I think our men really needs to step forward, shoulder to shoulder with our women, because it's obvious that the violence against women and girls are coming from the male gender. And so we need to get our young boys and have them line up and respect the opposite sex. We also have with us this morning from the Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture. This is the International Year of Women. And we have a number of women who are being recognized for their achievement in sports this particular year. So can you all stand for me who are here? This is also National Sports Heritage Month, and so I would call on the member for Seabreeze to bring brief greetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Mr. Speaker, before I sort of make mention of the wonderful ladies that are in the House, and certainly there are so many this morning, I want to certainly begin by congratulating the Zonta Club and the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, in particular the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, for their continued work in the fight to end all forms of violence against women, their continued work to advance the equality of not only women, but boys and girls and all people, their continued work to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that our country continues to grow and to excel, and that our people continue to achieve. Mr. Speaker, it is on the shoulders of these kinds of coming together, I call it, that the country is able to stand. The women are able to be here today. Though we are 5 here, but we are 5 strong, and we stand on their shoulders. And so I want to congratulate them. I always point out Dr. Jacinta Higgs, who is my was my 10th grade teacher in S.C. McPherson. And Mr. Speaker, this is how the world goes around. And today, Mr. Speaker, she is now the Director of Gender and Family Affairs. Certainly very proud of her, doing a wonderful job at the ministry, and did a wonderful job with me, I might as well say. And so, Mr. Speaker, we are certainly proud of the work that they've all been doing, and so we are here because of them. Mr. Speaker, they are addressing issues, is what I like and what I continue to see, and I became more aware, working in the Ministry of Social Services, the Prime Minister gave me that opportunity. They address issues, they advance gender equality, which is so important, Mr. Speaker, and they maintain the awareness of the need to celebrate women and to celebrate our achievements. The only challenge I will continue to ask them to pursue is to ensure that we daily and continually and annually bring young women along, Mr. Speaker. And so there is a planting. I think someone mentioned last week there is a watering and then there is an increase. Mr. Speaker, if the plight is going to be overcome and if we're going to continue to advance, we have to continue to bring the younger generation. And I am pleased, Mr. Speaker, because I see young faces of women in the House, Mr. Speaker, and so certainly we know that they're doing their job. Mr. Speaker, now in my capacity as Ministry of Youth, Sports and Culture, I've indicated to the House already that we celebrate this month, the entire month of November, as National Sports Heritage Month once again. And Mr. Speaker, this being the International Year of the Women, the Department of Sports thought it necessary to honor women in sports. Mr. Speaker, we're honoring 20 of them this month, and this is the first time I believe that it's happening, and I just continue to look and see so many greats in the House, LDs, and oh my goodness, Pauline, Mr. Speaker, we're among greatness, and they're all sitting here. I think in the corner of my eye, I see Minister Desmond Bannister, former Minister of Sports, just smiling, Mr. Speaker. I see him, Tonique William Darling, Mr. Speaker. These are the women that have brought fame and more glory to our country, and certainly, Mr. Speaker, we're here to honor them. I also want to recognize, before I point out who are here, the Women in Sports Commission, which is chaired by Ms. Cora Hepburn. Mr. Speaker, who is a member of the Bahamas Olympic Committee. Would you just quickly stand so that they can see? Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, ironically, the Women in Sports Commission this year, the International Year of the Woman, they are on December 14th celebrating men. They are celebrating men, Mr. Speaker, and I had an opportunity to, Mr. Speaker, have a courtesy call. They paid a courtesy call in the office of the minister, and they shared with us their reasoning and their rationale for it, and they said, and the chairman said, you know, the fact is that men were in many of these positions before us, and we would not have been here today had many of them not held our hands, worked along with us, and brought us up, Mr. Speaker, and now we fight and we stand by them, and we're going to continue. And so, Mr. Speaker, they said to me that we thought it only fitting that we recognize the hard work of the men in supporting women and assisting women in their role and their plight for gender equality, and to celebrate the work of women. And so, Mr. Speaker, we congratulate them. But here, Mr. Speaker, the 20 women we are honoring, and it's so important. We start with Agatha Delancey, Mr. Speaker, who is the first female president of Gulf in the Bahamas. Agatha Delancey. We know the famous Adriana Vanderpool Wallace, who is the first female Olympic swimming finalist. We celebrate her. Golden Girl, Chandra Sturrup, Olympic gold medalist 4 by 100 meters relay. We're celebrating her. Cora Hepburn, the first female president of volleyball, the Volleyball Federation. I would like to make mention that our very own Senator Dotson Isaacs, she was also a volleyball superstar. We're also celebrating Cynthia Mother Pratt, who is the world bronze medalist of softball, former member of this Honorable House of Assembly, and former Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Debbie Ferguson, Olympian gold medalist, the 4 by 100 meter relays, our golden girl. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to meet someone of I know from a child just the other day, and it was Della Thomas, first female international bodybuilding champion. Mr. Speaker, if she can wave her hand, the greatness is in the house. L.D. Clark, Olympic gold medalist. Can you believe, Mr. Speaker, Tonique Williams is in the house, Olympic gold medalist, 400 meters. Mr. Speaker, Barbara Thompson, founder of gymnastics in the Bahamas. And Mr. Speaker, the end of the week, we will have a fun run walk, starting from Goodman's Bay. And Mr. Speaker, who's been leading the charge in all of the communities with exercise and good health and healthy living. We celebrate Natasha Brown, first female international fitness instructor. Mr. Speaker, I could not be there this weekend, but I saw the video with Natasha we call it Natasha Downtown Brown. And Mr. Speaker, I thought I was back in training. She was saying, drop and give me 20. And I said, boy, I tell you. And so I saw her in the foyer of the ministry just yesterday. And she, you ready? We're ready for the fun run walk. You ready to go? I'm like, not really with you, but I'm ready. Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you, she's a real excellent fitness instructor. So we look forward to that fun run walk on Saturday. No need to fear, she'll take care of you. Then, Mr. Speaker, we have Aurea Wood Knowles, who is the first female softball manager. Mr. Speaker, she is also a Hall of Famer, and she is Chief Sports Officer within the Ministry of Youth, Sports, and Culture. Mr. Speaker, we celebrate another great in the House, Pauline Davis Thompson. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Mike Sands indicated, former B3A's president, that Ms. Pauline Davis Thompson is the most decorated track and field athlete in the Bahamas. Additionally, during the World Championships recently held in Doha, Qatar, she's the first female to have been appointed or awarded the role of lifetime member of the IAAF. We celebrate Rosamunda Carey, first female president of the B3A's track and field. We celebrate our very own in this honorable house, Chanel Ferguson, first female to win an international medal at the CGL long jump. We celebrate Sabathita Fines, one of our Golden Girls, Olympic gold medalist, 4x100 meter relay. And then we celebrate Georgette Rowe, Mr. Speaker. Georgette Rowe, trying to get her information. And Georgette Rowe was the first Bahamian female, Mr. Speaker, pure silk participant, Gulf. Then we have one Vicky Knowles, first female president of tennis, Bahamas Law and Tennis Association. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity to stand beside Ms. Waltia Rowe last week, the first female basketball player to be drafted into the Women's National Basketball Association, or WNBA. What an experience, Mr. Speaker. I was here and Waltia was up there. And every time I spoke, I sort of stepped back so that, you know, it can seem as though we were on the same level. I tried, Mr. Speaker, but real talent. Mr. Speaker, and then we had Yolette McCouen, first female to coach the NCAA division and first university basketball. Yolette. Mr. Speaker, and so today we celebrate these women. We realize, as Honorable Chanel Ferguson would have indicated, that when she first started, they only had uniforms for men. And she said that she had to hold up her pants and she had to still compete. Because at the end of the day, I believe she realized and we realized women who have opportunity, we have the opportunity to hold doors open for other women. And finally, Mr. Speaker, while recognizing these women, I would like to say, Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize their coaches. Many of them who identified these women, because it was one Walter Rowe who said to me, I was not interested in basketball. I was just a tall girl walking around East Street. And this gentleman passed and stopped me and said, you can do something in basketball. Little did she know, that little girl, she was about 16, became the first female to be drafted in the WNBA. And so, Mr. Speaker, we want to appreciate the coaches, many of them who were men. And now many who are women who identified that women have a role to play, women have a cause, and women are equally important to the growth, development of our country and the leadership of this country. Mr. Speaker, I thank you, and we congratulate all of the women as we celebrate women everywhere during this National Women's Week. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As the only female in the Cabinet, you represented well. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communications by ministers. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for South Beach.
May it please the Honourable Speaker. Mr. Speaker, please permit me before the start of my communications to also extend congratulations to Zonta Club and their presidents, as well as to the Department of Gender and Family Affairs led by Dr. Higgs. Wish further to extend congratulations to our female legends who are in the House this morning, and congratulations to the school, Atlantic High School, and their social studies class. I pay dear respect to my beloved teacher and mentor, Mrs. Darling, who sits in the gallery this morning. It's been a kind voice, reason, support, encouragement over the years to me personally. Mr. Honorable Speaker, on November the 10th, this year, a delegation from the Ministry of Education, headed by myself, attended the 40th General Conference, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, commonly known as UNESCO, in Paris, France, under the theme, Regeneration, Rethinking Multilateralism with Young Change Makers. I was accompanied by His Excellency Desmond Edwards, the Ambassador to UNESCO, and Ms. Deidre Bevins, now Secretary General for UNESCO in the Bahamas. Ms. Audrey Azoulay is the Director General of the UNESCO, having been elected in the 39th session, and she took office during this 40th General Assembly. Elected as President of the conference was Ambassador Altay Senezar from Istanbul, who had been in the diplomatic and foreign affairs service of his country since 1979. The General Council Conference is held every 2 years, and it determines the policies and the main lines of work for the organization. One of its primary duties is to set the programs and the budget of UNESCO while also electing members to its executive board. 1 week before the UNESCO trip, Bahamas, with the support of the UNESCO's Caribbean office, hosted a one-day workshop with member countries from Latin America and the Caribbean in dialogue and establishing linkages and entry points for global citizenship education. Collaboration was important, Mr. Speaker, not only because it allowed us to view and commit to adopting best practices globally, but also to see how they may be incorporated into our own instructional agenda and also formulate policies and an educational framework for our curriculum. The Bahamas anticipates hosting more of such workshops. While in Paris on November 15th, I addressed the Assembly of some heads of states, ministers of education, youth, and culture, and other heads of delegations from across the globe, some 2,000 attendees, in which I reminded the esteemed delegates of the Bahamas' continuing commitment and support for the strategic objectives of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, particularly goal number 4. I advised that the support had become even more critical for the Bahamas because of the recent visit to our country in the early morning hours of September 2nd, 2019, of Hurricane Dorian. During my presentation, I extended our country's appreciation to UNESCO for its prominence and its efforts to mitigate the negative effects of climate change and the correlating increasingly stronger storms that wreak devastatingly impacts on our small island states such as the Bahamas. I further informed the esteemed delegates of the ministry's principal objectives in this term, that is, of its 3-year, $17 million digitization program, which started last year, the subsequent piloting of the virtual school among the Caribbean's first in this region, a digitization process that will facilitate distance learning, personalized and individualized instructions, and the elimination potentially of a chronic perennial teacher shortage, vital to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which ensures equal access to quality education for all Bahamian citizens and the promotion of lifelong learning. The virtual school, I told the esteemed delegates, proved its prescient value to the displacement of the thousands of students because of Dorian, which now provides distance learning instructions to some 12 districts and more than 300 students, many more districts being added each and every week. During the UNESCO meeting, Mr. Speaker, much focus was placed by Caribbean nations on the challenges faced by small island developing states with respect to climate change and disaster preparedness. I informed the esteemed delegates, Caribbean nations such as the Bahamas had to undertake proactive measures to ensure the safeguarding of our national assets. These assets both include tangible and intangible resources, and in this regard, the Bahamas' accession to the Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2003 represented a fundamental attempt to preserve, protect, and enhance essential and vulnerable components of Bahamian achievements and cultural practices, including Bahamian traditional musical forms such as jonkano, gombe, reconstrict, rhyming spirituals, and Spence-style folk guitar, Bahamian bush medicine traditions, Bahamian traditional land tenure platters, and Bahamian straw work patterns and traditions. In pursuit of the protection of these tangible assets, the Bahamas will make an application to UNESCO for a financial grant in the amount of $100,000 to assist in producing a tentative list of all intangible expressions of cultural heritage throughout the country in preparation for the submission of the same to be inscribed as intellectual properties of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. The inscription of the Bahamas' intangible cultural heritage items will ensure that the assistance of UNESCO is provided in safeguarding these priceless resources should they come under any threat at any time. Specifically, funding will be provided by UNESCO, including technical assistance, to protect any item inscribed on UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list. To this end, Mr. Speaker, UNESCO officials in Paris invited the Bahamas to attend the 14th session of the Intergovernmental Committee for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, which is to be held in Bogota from 9th to 14th of December 2019, at which time we intend to and expect to successfully have Junkanoo placed on the intangible cultural heritage of UNESCO. Mr. Speaker, UNESCO provides an excellent opportunity for our country to benefit from its array of technical and financial assistance in a variety of ways, such that we are now able to access funding of several hundred thousands of dollars to enable us to improve digital literacy and many other ventures. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, are you intending to table? Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document to lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence and leave to resign seat and new writs. Before I go on, honorable members, I have a number of reports from the Auditor General that I intend to table at this time and have them referred to the Public Accounts Committee. The first report, it is a report of the Bahamas Embassy in Beijing, China, for the period 1st of January 2017 to the 30th of September 2018. The second report is the report of the Auditor General for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Bahamas High Commission in London for the period July 2016 to June 2018. The third report is a report from the Auditor General, the audit of the agreement between the Ministry of the Environment and Housing and the National Insurance Board. And the fourth report is a audit from the Auditor General for the Ministry of Education, Scholarship and Education Loan Division Scholarship Process Review Report. Presentation of petitions. Presentation and reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise. Move the second reading of the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act of 2019. I do so, sir, on the strength and the courage of my late mother, who taught me to always do the right thing for the Bahamian people. And also with the sure knowledge that the people of Carmichael who elected me and the Bahamian people will benefit for decades to come from the decisions that this caring, free national movement government has taken to ensure that they have reliable, inexpensive power. And that, sir, will be our legacy. Let me first, Mr. Speaker, welcome the students who are here, who are paying attention keenly. They're getting to see how their laws are made firsthand. And I want to commend them for spending the time to see how it actually happens, how your laws are actually made. I also want to say, sir, that notwithstanding the absence of the Zontians, that I tried to get as close to Orange as I could today. And I want them to know that I support their campaign to completely eradicate the despicable scourge of violence against women. I apologize for my cough, sir. Unfortunately, my Theraflu has not been as helpful as I thought it would be. I will try my best to speak as I wish. I also want to commend the athletes who are here today, the female athletes.
I was sitting right here to catch it.
Many of them who I know personally, who I've spent many time with in many foreign countries. One of them being the Sydney Olympics in Australia. And I know Minister Wells and Minister Lewis would have wished to be part of that also, because they were also part of those teams. Speaker, this is a critical piece of legislation. And accordingly, sir, I will seek to explain it and discuss it in the most forthright manner, particularly those matters that are in the public domain. When we introduced the bill, we foreshadowed one amendment, and we will seek to do that in committee, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, in 2015, the then PLP administration passed the Rate Reduction Bond Act 2015. Today, we are repealing that act, and we are replacing it in its entirety. However, Mr. Speaker, in light of the disingenuous comments by some of those same persons here today, who the Bahamian people have quite rightly relegated to sitting in opposition, it is critical for me to go back to 2015 when I speak. In introducing the bill to Parliament at that time, former Deputy Prime Minister Davis indicated that the former administration intended to use the rate reduction bonds to raise some $600 million to pay off BEC's then current debt and to settle other liabilities that the company had, including settling unfunded pensions, initiating an environmental remediation exercise, and reforming the electricity sector. Today, sir, we anticipate that the funds raised by the bonds will be used to refinance EPL's debt of $321 million, to pay for the Wadzilla plant, phase 2 power plant that we desperately need, for conversion of fuel to lower cost LNG, for critical capital upgrades at BPL, for Family Island solar projects, and for the implementation of an advanced metering system, among other projects that I shall discuss later in detail in this contribution. Each of these projects, sir, will benefit the Bahamian consumer. They will result in lower prices for all BPL customers as well as reliable, efficient power generation. Mr. Speaker, the Electricity Act 2015 and the Rate Reduction Bond Act 2015 were passed by the former PLP administration. The Electricity Act requires the government to issue bond. The Electricity Act requires the government, and I emphasize requires, to issue rate reduction bonds, and also requires that the bonds be financed by the bill-paying customers of BPL. And this is what the Act says, and I quote, "There shall be issued," shall is mandatory, "there shall be issued in accordance with the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act, rate reduction bonds for the purpose of financing liabilities related to the debts of the corporation and BPL." Section 19B says, "The rate reduction bonds shall be secured by the revenue streams of BPL comprised in the rate reduction bond fee." So customers of BPL under the law that was passed in 2015 have to pay the rate reduction bond fee. That's the law that they passed. 19C, BPL shall, to constitute and secure payment of rate reduction bonds, 1, impose on each grid customer a rate reduction bond fee to be included in the tariff billed to the customer. That's the law that they passed, Mr. Speaker. Every customer of BPL is going to be billed with a rate reduction bond fee. 2, periodically adjust the rate reduction bond fee to include such top portion and other charges in the tariff rate as may be required to serve as upfront and ongoing financing costs of the rate reduction bonds. So not only did they say that BPL customers must pay the fee, they say the fee is to be periodically adjusted to include the other charges. That's the law. We respect the law, Mr. Speaker, but nobody should come here and say that the FNM government is changing that aspect of the law. That is the law that they passed. Speaker, it's very clear from that law that every customer of BPL will be required by law, passed by the PLP, to pay the rate reduction bond fee. But Mr. Speaker, they got cold feet with the election coming up in 2017, and they refused to carry out their plans to utilize rate reduction bonds to improve the availability of electricity for all of us. That is why, Mr. Speaker, we had such a challenging summer. And that is all why we all had to endure load shedding. Mr. Speaker, we on this side don't do the people's business like that. In contrast, the members opposite, we are going to frankly explain the law that we are passing, and we're going to proceed in the best interest of the Bahamian people. Speaker, PLP administration first intended to raise $650 million through the rate reduction bond. And that's all documented. If anyone questions it, I have the documents. It's all documented. And they realized that $80 million was available through the sinking fund, and so they settled on raising $600 million. They just settled it off. They bragged about it. They said it was a great thing that they were doing. And then after the end of the day, after making all those public statements, they did what the PLP always does. Absolutely nothing. They procrastinated, Mr. Speaker. They delayed. They hesitated. They lingered. They dragged their feet. They tarried. They were dilatory. They kicked the ball down the road, and they left the heavy lifting to a competent FNM government. Mr. Speaker, The incompetence and the inaction of the former PLP administration is the reason why we had the challenges with power outages and load shedding this year. Speaker, the characteristic procrastination of members opposite is only part of the story as to how we got where we are today with respect to power generation challenges. They also lack vision. Mr. Speaker, when I graduated from high school, the best jobs were BEC and Batelco. That's where lots of my classmates went. They offered better salaries in the public service. And one essentially had a guarantee of lifetime employment with both of those corporations. BEC was a profitable company, for those who don't know. Let me just give you some figures. Under the Free National Movement in 2000, BEC made $29,303,000 in profits in 1 year, 2000. $29 million in profits. In 2001, BEC made $17,784,000 in profits. In 2002, BEC made $10,507,000 in profits. And Mr. Speaker, under members opposite, in 2003, 2004, and 2005, BEC made profits. In that 6-year span, Mr. Speaker, BEC made profits in excess of $98 million, which is an average profit of $16.6 million a year. The final years of the second FNM administration were good for BEC's profitability until, Mr. Speaker, until the PLP's ill-advised lowering of the tariff in 2003, just as the energy crisis hit us. There could never, ever be a better case for bad timing. Because shortly after that, BEC started losing money. And BEC lost money. And BEC lost more money. Mr. Speaker, from 2004 to 2019, BEC and BPL's foregone revenue loss, the foregone revenue loss was $983,165,066.54. That's the foregone revenue loss over those years as a result of the tariff adjustment. Almost $1 billion in projected revenue. Almost $1 billion in projected revenue was lost directly as a result of the decreased tariffs. Had those tariffs not been interfered with in 2003, BPL would never be so financially challenged today. Thank you, PLP. Mr. Speaker, there was no profits in those years. Mr. Speaker, the last time that BEC made a profit under the PLP was 2005. In 2006, the PLP put BEC in the loss column for the first time in its history. First time ever. Net profit? That year, 2006, BEC lost $2,916,000. Under them, BEC and BPL lost money in 2006, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015, and 2016. They are losers, Mr. Speaker. In fact, Mr. Speaker, in 2013, BEC had its biggest loss in history, because under the PLP in 2013, BEC lost $58,035,000. $58 million in 1 year, more than it lost in any 2-year period under the FNM. And they want to criticize us? Mr. Speaker, they were incompetent in managing the affairs of BEC and BPL. Speaker, since 2006, BEC has only made a profit in 3 years. You could note this, Exuma. 2010, 2017, and 2019. There's a reason I skipped 2017. And we know who was in power in those years. The other challenge that BEC and BPL has had, sir, is that it kept borrowing money. And it borrowed money under both administrations. This is not just a PLP problem. BEC just kept borrowing money under both administrations. In the last 18 years, they borrowed some $381,990,000. Got so bad, Mr. Speaker, and when the FNM was elected in 2007, the banks required the government to guarantee some $200 million in BEC debt that we met on the books. BEC had no real collateral. The corporation had been overstaffed by the PLP, and it still paid high salaries. So the banks did not trust BEC. Speaker, one other reason that we face these challenges today is because of bad choices and even more delays. When we were elected in 2017, we met BPL with 17 engines, 8 of them at Blue Hills and 9 at Clifton Pier. Speaker, let me tell you about those engines. We have 2 of them that were purchased in 1960, and they're members of this parliament who were not born then. We have 4 of them, 4 of those engines that were purchased in 1982, which is history to these young students who are here today. We have 2 of them that were purchased in 1992. We have 1 that was purchased in 1999, 1 that was purchased in 2002, 1 that was purchased in 2003, 1 that was purchased in 2004, 2 that was purchased in 2004, 1 that was purchased in 2005, 1 that was purchased in 2006, 1 that was purchased in 2007, and the last engine that BPL has was purchased in 2013. Speaker, that's 17 engines with an average life of 26 years from 5 different manufacturers. So you can imagine what a nightmare it is for BPL to maintain and secure parts for them. Speaker, a few of those engines are at the end of their life. One of the 1960 engines has been decommissioned, is being used for parts to keep the other one operating. To add to all of these challenges, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, leading up to the elections, the PLP hired 166 people at BPL, even though, I think that's 106. 106, even though the year before, in 2005, their business plan that they refused to release to the Bahamian people indicated that the company was overstaffed. And that business plan was not released until the FNM came to power. Absolutely unbelievable, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, another reason why we face so many challenges with load shedding this summer is because since 2007, BPL has only purchased 1 engine, and they've not had the money to buy any engines without securing government guarantees. Fortunately, sir, this administration is now focusing on replacing these old, inefficient, unreliable engines that are so costly to operate. In 3 weeks, sir, 7 of the most powerful, efficient Wärtsilä engines will come online in New Providence. It will be the first time since 1982 that we have invested in more than 2 engines in any given year. And it will begin the transformation to reliable, inexpensive power that this country so desperately needs. Thank you, Free National Movement. Mr. Speaker, That is the background to the introduction of the rate reduction bond bill that was passed by the PLP in 2015. At that time, the member for Cat Island emphasized that when the rate reduction bond bill was passed into law, the government guarantee of BEC debt would be removed from the government balance sheet. That is still one of the chief advantages of passing this bill today. So, Mr. Speaker, let me explain what a rate reduction bond is. A rate reduction bond transaction is a financing structure that is commonly used by utility companies in the United States. And it involves the formation of a special purpose vehicle that issues bonds to investors. That special purpose vehicle then collects a rate reduction bond fee from the customers of the utility company. And the right to receive the bond fee is then sold to the bond issuer to form the primary collateral, for the bonds. And the interest on the utility and the interest and principal on the bonds is repaid to bondholders from the rate reduction bond. That's what a bond is. Mr. Speaker, unlike more traditional forms of financing, such as borrowing from commercial banks, a critical component of rate reduction bond transactions is a strong legislative foundation, providing bondholders with the certainty that the rate reduction bond, first, is authorized by legislation. Secondly, that it must be imposed on all customers in accordance with the legislation, regardless of the financial condition of the utility company. And third, it must be adjusted in accordance with the legislation so that at all times, it is sufficient to pay the interest and principal and related financial costs, including debt service coverage on the bonds. In other words, Mr. Speaker, it is, in effect, credit that is authorized by legislation, based firmly on the statutory framework. In that respect, sir, it is different from a traditional bond that is issued by a private company based solely on the contractual terms of the financing and the security documents between the parties. Rate reduction bond transactions have been utilized by many American US-based utility companies to replace higher cost debt with lower cost debt, more highly rated debt, including, among others, AEP, Texas, Hawaii, Long Island Power Authority, Duke, Florida, and Entergy, Gulf States, Louisiana. In recent times, Mr. Speaker, at least 72 rate reduction bond transactions have been closed in the United States with an aggregate power of approximately $67 billion, utility companies. The reason this type of transaction secures higher credit ratings and therefore lower cost to customers, as we expect the case to be here, is due to the certainty that is provided to bondholders regarding the rate reduction bond fee as a result of the strong regulatory foundation that I referred to previously. Rate reduction bond transactions have been implemented in Ontario, Canada, and in many American states. Specifically, sir, 24 states, including Florida, Ohio, Texas, California, New York, and Massachusetts, have enabling legislation similar to the bill that we are passing today, permitting utilities to securitize a variety of costs, including, among others, hurricane costs, environmental and nuclear costs, as well as for rate stabilization and debt refunding purposes. We also advise that several additional states have legislation pending. So, Mr. Speaker, today we are following best practices in the Bahamas, and to give credit to members opposite, that is what they initially sought to do. Mr. Speaker, Bahamas Rate Reduction Bond Limited Company, which I will refer to as BRRBL from now on, is a special purpose vehicle that was incorporated as a non-profit company under the Companies Act. Over the past year, the company has engaged a team of world-class Bahamian and international legal and accounting firms and investment banks to advise on the rate reduction bond transaction, including Higgs & Johnson, Lennox Payton, Norton Rose Fulbright, Citibank North America, and Ernst & Young. The execution of a rate reduction bond transaction in the Bahamas at this time, incorporating elements of infrastructure finance, future flow securitizations, and financial transactions by entities which are government-owned or government-backed, that is quasi-sovereign, seeking to raise approximately $650 million in the local and international markets, capital markets, is critical for several reasons. Let me say those reasons. First, we will safeguard the stability of BPL by refinancing existing legacy debt owed by BEC and BPL to commercial banks of approximately $321 million, which falls due next month. That permits the debt to be repaid on more flexible terms over a period of 20 to 30 years, as opposed to the current short-term rolling debt. Secondly, sir, we will fund critical infrastructural investments of approximately $220 million, which will stabilize the electricity system in the Bahamas, which will expand generation capacity, which will reduce the cost of fuel, and help the government with its solar energy objectives, and improve metering collections. Mr. Speaker, BPL has created a chart to illustrate how we will anticipate the money will be used, and I'm going to table that when I finish, but I want to go through some of it. I mentioned the $321 million, which allows debt to be fully repaid over a 20 to 30-year period, as opposed to the current short-term debt, which historically has been rolling instead of repaying. So every time we get to a certain point, we roll it over. We get more money, we roll it over. We're going to stop doing that. We're going to repay the debt. We're going to match our long-term liabilities with lifelong assets, and BPL will have increased financial flexibility, which will allow it to focus on its business and allocate capital to system improvements. Speaker, we have to have the phase 2 Wärtsilä expansion. We are allocating $70 million to be able to complete that by 2021. And that phase 2 expansion of Wärtsilä generation facility will bring on an additional 90 megawatts of capacity for a total capacity of 222 megawatts. We will see reduced electricity rates to consumers through lower fuel charges, given increased efficiency and cheaper, cleaner fuels, including the ability to accept LNG. We will have added capacity that will eliminate the need for rolling load shedding and brownouts. And we will invest in Bahamas power requirements for the long term. Mr. Speaker, we expect $28 million to be invested in solar installations in the Family Islands. We expect to have 8.5 megawatts of solar installations across Abaco and the Family Islands. We expect to increase the base load generation across Family Islands using reliable and clean technology. Low fuel cost energy will help reduce the fuel charge for customers and help reduce carbon emissions. Speaker, we expect to invest $15 million by 2021 in upgrading and implementing generation facilities across the Family Islands, allowing facilities to burn LNG in all those Family Islands. We expect cheaper and more efficient fuel and diesel than the diesel that we are currently using. We'll reduce And Exuma, that's good point. That's good for you, because when you go in Black Point, you don't have to go in that place in Black Point that deafens you. We'll reduce fuel charges for customers, and we'll have cleaner sources of fuel in the Family Islands. We expect to have, Mr. Speaker, we expect to invest $15.4 million in fiberglass cooling pipe replacement, which will replace the cooling pipe at the generation facility to help improve generation efficiency, which will result in lower cost of generation and therefore lower prices for consumers. Speaker, we expect to invest $30 million in advanced metering infrastructure, which will replace the manual physical meters we have with smart meter technology to allow real-time metering capabilities and immediate connection or disconnection. There will be fast and more efficient identification. There will be rectification of system issues, and it will allow BPL to quickly and more efficiently disconnect delinquent customers, which will improve collections. We'll have improved collections, which will mean BPL's customers won't be charged for much to subsidize anymore, to subsidize delinquent customers. And that $90 million to $100 million debt that we continue to carry for delinquent customers is going to disappear. Mr. Speaker, we expect to invest some $6 million in system reinforcement and customer connections to include various system upgrades identified by periodical inspections. Excuse me, sir. An expenditure for customer connections before reimbursement by customers via contributions and aid of construction. And that will increase the overall reliability of the current grid in New Providence and provide upfront capital to expedite customer connections. Speaker, we expect to spend some $48 million. Construction in relation to installation of the 98, excuse me, sir. Thanks. Speaker, let me go on. We expect to spend $34.9 million in line upgrades and extensions to include removing old and installing new facilities, installing or reinforcing fiber optic cable and overhead static lines, and installing spare ducts in the right way of new road construction to be used for further underground circuits. So we don't have as many challenges during hurricanes. And Mr. Speaker, one of the challenges we have is there's certain areas that BPL can't tell when power's out. So last week, 2 weeks ago when we were supposed to meet here, power was out, and BPL couldn't tell power was out. And there's certain areas in New Providence, like Stapleton, where power goes out and BPL can't tell that power is out. So, Mr. Speaker, these are the kinds of improvements that we're going to make to improve overall reliability of the current grid in New Providence, improve transmission, which will lower the electricity losses and reduce the cost of power for consumers. Mr. Speaker, we expect to spend some $24.7 million installing new substations and replacing old, underrated facilities at Arawaki, Big Pond, Blue Hill, Clifton Pier. Mr. Speaker, if you go in those places in Blue Hills and you look at what they're dealing with now, the computers are as old as those engines. East Street, Southern Street, Paradise Island, South Soldier Road, Winton, other substations. We're going to perform system protection upgrades and grounding studies to increase the overall reliability of the current grid in New Providence. They'll proactively upgrade substations that have potential to cause service issues rather than waiting to replace them once an issue occurs. Speaker, BPL expects to spend $14.3 million in Eleuthera by 2023 to include upgrades to the north end of the island and the south end to protect projected load growth and reduce voltage drops along the circuits. Those upgrades, not Eleuthera, will improve the reliability of current grid of the grid in Eleuthera. Speaker, you will note that the total amount is short of $650 million. And that is because I have not included potential investments in rebuilding Abaco's electrical infrastructure after Hurricane Dorian's devastation, which may be funded through other sources. And I say may because we may have utilized this, but we are seeking to utilize other sources. But sir, the significant new investment activity that BPL will have to engage in requires capital and cannot be funded using cash flow from existing tariffs, which I indicated were reduced in 2003 with disastrous results, almost $1 billion of disastrous results. Ours is now required by law, and as with other rate reduction bond transactions, it is anticipated that the interest and the principal in the proposed rate reduction bond transaction will be repaid by a rate reduction bond fee that will be included in the monthly electricity bills of every customer of BPL. Mr. Speaker, we expect that the issuance of the rate reduction bonds will lead to a temporary increase in the average household billing of an average of $20 to $30 monthly for about 10 months in 2020. So, unfortunately, this is the price that we will all have to pay because of the proven incompetence of the former PLP administration. The good news, I'm talking about good news. The good news is that this will be a short-term increase that will be wiped out in 2021 when the cost of generation, Speaker, in 2021, listen, Exoma, listen, in 2021, when the cost of generation will decrease drastically due to the completed installation of the second station, consisting of even more fuel-efficient engines, better operation performance, lower fuel costs brought on by the utilization of Shell's internationally respected hedging expertise. Mr. Speaker, from all indications that we are getting, it is clear that debt issued will be the best possible credit quality outside a transaction secured by an outright government guarantee. The rate reduction bonds the rate reduction bonds will seek to attain a credit rating equal to the sovereign credit rating of the Bahamas. Non-government guaranteed commercial borrowing by BPL cannot achieve that level of credit quality. And the cost of alternative commercial borrowing would therefore be higher, with a larger impact on customer tariffs. Speaker, Bahamas Rate Reduction Bond Limited intends to offer the majority of the bonds in the U.S. capital markets. Because the amount of BPL funding available from global capital markets is larger than that available in the local market. Approximately $70 million will be offered in the Bahamian capital markets. And it's very similar to what members opposite said they were going to do, because they said they were going to offer 500 in the U.S. market and 100 million in our markets. The proposed rate reduction bond, will be longer. It will be 20 years. Listen, South Andrews, listen. It will be 20 years than what is available to BPL in commercial banking markets, which is typically less than 5 years. This means that the cost of debt service is spread out over time and is eventually outweighed by operational cost savings from the capital expenditure that is funded by the rate reduction bond. That minimizes the cost impact on customers and indeed allow customer tariffs to be reduced over time. Mr. Speaker, it is sad that I'm obliged to advise that even though the act was enacted in 2015, it's only now, 4 years later, 2019, for the first time, that legal and financial advisors have been engaged by the Bahamas Rate Reduction Limited and are preparing a live transaction. This exposes the negligence and incompetence of the former administration. This process has brought deficiencies. Speaker, I don't know what members' officers have. I don't know what difficulty they have with the adjectives I use, you know. I mean, nothing wrong. Let's repeat, negligence and incompetence. Negligence and incompetence. That process has brought deficiencies. Mr. Speaker, I want Cat Island to listen, because I want Cat Island, I want you to answer me. I want you to answer me. This process has brought deficiencies, Mr. Speaker. This process has brought deficiencies to light. Speaker, this process has brought deficiencies to light that were not noticed in 2015 when the act was drafted and passed with great fanfare, but not used. The legal and financial advisors have identified many deficiencies in the 2015 Act. I'm going to take them one by one, and I want you to take notes.
That's QC. Listen.
Which speaks to another level of... Well, let me go to the adjectives. Which speaks to another level... let me finish my adjectives first. Which speaks to another level of incompetence by members opposite. So I'm going to just touch on a few today so you could take notes. Mr. Speaker, there's been a lack of clarity and internal consistency in places. There's failure to implement transaction mechanics and credit protections that are standard in securitized transactions. So let me start, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to start going through the bill right now. Mr. Speaker,
15 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the 2015 bill restricts the use of bond proceeds. In particular, sir, there's no provision to allow for the use of bond proceeds for capital expenditure. The definition of rate reduction bond financing liabilities has to be amended in Section 2. So we are amending the definition of rate reduction bond financial liabilities to reflect how the bond proceeds are being used. And that means we have to amend Section 2. So, Mr. Speaker, with all of the fanfare, members opposite passed the Act in 2015, it still could not, Mr. Speaker, I only have 15 minutes, so I need to speak. I don't need them to interrupt me. So after all the fanfare that members opposite passed the Act in 2015, it still could not help the Bahamian people to achieve what they need most, the procurement of new, high-efficient engines. We have fixed that problem today, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the second problem that the Act that I'm going to draw to your attention is the potential negative operational impact due to changes in the primary location of customer payments received by BPL. What happened, Mr. Speaker, is that the Act mandates that all revenues of BPL, both from electricity usage and from the rate reduction bond fee, are deposited in a waterfall account in the name of a trustee, even though the rate reduction bond fee will only be a small percentage of BPL's total revenue. And the rate reduction bond fee is to be transferred from the waterfall account back to BPL as a servicer, and then from the servicer to the issuer for debt service and financing costs. And then, Mr. Speaker, only after steps 1 and 2 above, those 2 steps, would the residual revenue be transferred back to BPL. That would require all the customers to remit payment to a single new account. We are amending Section 731A, 112F, 2224, and 32.2b and E. And by the time I finish, Mr. Speaker, there ain't gonna be much act left. That's why we gotta replace it. Mr. Speaker, instead of making payments to any clearing banks in the Bahamas, it would mean that BPL's revenue relating to electricity usage would have to go into the waterfall account, even though it's not form part of the collateral for the bonds, and then be paid back to BPL after the debt service on the bonds is paid, creating implementation, cash flow, and operational challenges of BPL. Further, BPL would incur significant bank charges as a result of the transfer fees back and forth. 3, Mr. Speaker, there is a risk under the 2015 Act that you have infringed the Dodd-Frank Act in the United States. And there is a risk that the United States Securities and Exchange Commission would require BPL to purchase and retain a portion of the bonds as a result of the bonds being offered to investors in the United States. In particular, a certain portion of the bonds will have to be purchased, and current cash is likely not to be available for such investment. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we are adding a new section 7, subsection 6, to help bolster the argument that the conditions set forth in the SEC's risk retention rules are met or are inapplicable. 4, Mr. Speaker, there's absence of any express statutory authority to substitute the entity collecting the rate reduction bond fee, the servicer under the Act, in the event the servicer defaults under its contractual obligations or the industry in the Bahamas is restructured, in particular, preserving the role of the servicer. So, Mr. Speaker, we're adding a new definition of successor utility in reference to successor utilities. 5, Mr. Speaker, clarity is required on the BPL customers who will be responsible for paying the rate reduction bond fee, the potential investors, the comfort required regarding the adequacy of the revenue stream to satisfy interest and principal payments. A particular note, Mr. Speaker, and I had to tell them, I'm sorry, the Minister of Finance here. Today, under both administrations, the government of the Bahamas does not make regular payments to BPL. Investors need to know that the largest consumers are not in the practice required to pay monthly, not every year. So, Mr. Speaker, we are amending Section 19, subsection 2, Section 30, and subsection 32 to add language to make it clear that any person connected with the transmission or distribution system of BPL will be responsible for payment of rate reduction bond fee, including the government and self-generating companies, customers who may be required to pay a rate reduction bond fee with respect to electricity that they generate, if so provided in the financing order that's being prepared. Mr. Speaker, rating agencies and investors are becoming increasingly concerned about net metering and similar arrangements and about battery storage, and we have to ensure that they are contemplated in the Act. And Mr. Speaker, we're also amending Section 19, subsection 2, A and C, and Section 30, subsection 1, 2, 4, and Section 32. Mr. Speaker, there are challenges with respect to debt service margin, which must be maintained by the issuer, which is not expressly provided in the Act. And so we are amending Section, the questions with Section 20, subsection 3. And so we are amending Section 30B1 to add language to include debt service coverage margin as an ongoing financing cost, Mr. Speaker. Number 7, Mr. Speaker. I hope you're taking notes, Cat Island. Mr. Speaker, the Rate Reduction Bond Act currently provides that the bondholders will hold the legal title. The legal title. They want to give the bondholders the legal title to the right to collect the rate reduction bond fee, the rate reduction bond property, which will form part of the collateral for the bonds. As a result, the issuer will not be able to grant subordinate security interest to other third parties. So, Mr. Speaker, we are amending Sections 22, Section 23, and Section 24 of the Act so that the bond trustees will only hold a security interest in the rate reduction bond fee for the bondholders, which is similar to a secured lender, and not the legal title. They can't hold the legal title. We don't let them hold the legal title. To allow the issuer to grant subordinate security interests to other third parties. 8, Mr. Speaker. Many references to BEC, careless drafting, many references to BEC in the Act are out of date because you created BPL. So we have to amend Section 7, subsection 6, Section 9, subsection 2, Section 17, subsection 1, Section 21, subsection 1, Section 22, subsection 1, and Section 22, subsection 3.
Read it.
Take out corporation and refer to the company, which is BPL, that you created. The Speaker. Speaker, the 2015 Act currently provides that the rate reduction property right arises when the minister issues the rate reduction bond. This is very serious. When the minister issues the financing order, it will be transferred to the issuer when the minister issues a notice of confirmation. And the problem with that is that is before the bond proceeds are issued. So you're seeking to issue something you don't have. When BEC and both BPL have existing secured creditors, you can't do that. It can't exist in law. So we have to amend Section 17.1, Section 22.1, Section 22.3, and Section 25.3 to enable the dates when the property right arises and is transferred to the issue to be specified in the rate reduction bond financing order as the date when the bond proceeds are issued, when any existing debt held by BPL and BEC will be existing security interests in respect of the debt that you purport to release. Number 10, Mr. Speaker, the issue of the bond process, Section 22.3 of the Act, requires that the property right to collect the rate reduction bond fee is transferred to the issuer. However, Section 21 only allows the bond proceeds to be used to satisfy the rate reduction bond financing liabilities. And that is that Section 21 and Section 22.3 are inconsistent. And so we have to amend that also, Mr. Speaker. 11, Mr. Speaker. Certain provisions of the Act restrict the security which the issuer can provide for the rate reduction bonds to the right to collect the rate reduction bond fee, while others contemplate that the issuer may pledge other assets. So we have to amend the definition of pledge in Section 2. We have to amend Section 4A. We have to amend Section 10C. We have to amend Section 11.2A. We have to amend Section 22.4. We have to amend Section 23.1. We have to amend Section 24.1 to enable the bonds to be collateralized with assets of the issuer other than the right to collect the rate reduction bond fee.
Ready to read this 2015 bill?
Mr. Speaker,
Ready?
number 12. I'm getting tired. So I'm gonna stop at 13. Mr. Speaker,
Go in.
the assets of the issuer can only be applied in furtherance of the undertaking of the issue, which is limited to the issuance of the rate reduction bond. This is a major fault. That does not allow the surplus issuer to be distributed to BPL where you wanted it to go in the first place. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to amend Section 5, subsection 3A. We have to amend Section 5.5. We have to amend Section 7.1. We have to expand the scope of the undertaking of the issue to include the carrying out of activities or actions that are permitted, or required, or contemplated by the Act, and expressly empower the issuer to transfer any surplus funds to BPL, who's supposed to get it. It's so provided in the financing order. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have to amend Section 5, subsection 3, Section 5, subsection 5,
You had to rewrite this one.
Section 7, subsection 1, Section 7, subsection 2G, Section 11, subsection 2G, and M, and Section 13E. And then, Mr. Speaker, 13. There are terms you use in the Act and you don't define that are important terms for interpretation. So we have to include amendments. We have to include certain terms like ancillary agreements. What are they? What are ongoing financing costs? They have to be added to the definitions. Mr. Speaker, in addition to those amendments, there's some recommended revisions to the Act. There are some challenges with respect to ambiguity. There's ambiguity in the rate reduction fee. And we had to look at Section 13 and add language that's more consistent so that there are no challenges with the rate reduction fee mechanism adjustment. So we've sought to put that in line with similar legislation in the United States. Mr. Speaker, there's an absence in Section 13 and 14 of language to comfort investors that the bond fee adjustment mechanism will operate without intervention or delay. And so we had to add language to provide that any review of the adjustment filing by ERC will be limited to the correction of mathematical errors, and that will provide necessary comfort to investors that the rate reduction bond fee adjustment mechanism will operate without intervention or delay. Mr. Speaker, there's a lack of clarity in the language outlining how the rate reduction bond fee will be calculated. And so we have to, the definition of rate reduction bond fee in Section 2, we have to revise, excuse me, sir. We have to revise the definition of rate reduction bond fee to expressly provide for the creation of a first charge, first allocation for BPL revenues after receipt and deposit to BPL, and provide for more flexibility regarding the calculation of the fee to more closely align it to BPL's billing practice. Mr. Speaker, the current Act currently exempts rate reduction bonds from tax, but leaves the bond fee subject to tax. And so we have to amend the tax exemptions in Section 31(3) to include the rate reduction bond fee. Mr. Speaker, tried to rush through all of them, but I will make my notes available. In light of these deficiencies that the PLP enacted in the current law, there's consensus among the legal and financial advisors. There's consensus among the legal and financial advisors that the 2015 Act should be amended extensively to incorporate many revisions. Those revisions involve the expansion of the purposes for which the bond proceeds can be used to include capital improvements by BVL. That's very important. Amendments to the mechanics of the transfer of the rate reduction bond fee to the issuer. The transfer of any surplus revenue to BPL, which is not provided for. The expansion of definition of customer to whom the rate reduction bond fee will be applied. The clarification of provisions relating to security mechanics for the bond offering. And the clarification of any number of inconsistencies. Speaker, I may have to ask you for just a minute or two extra. Based on the legal advice, Mr. Speaker, both local and international, if the recommended amendments are not made to this deficient legislation that the PLP passed, the best case outcome would be that the bonds are issued but at a higher cost. The recommended changes being enacted. That would result in higher customer tariffs that might otherwise have been the case. Further, Mr. Speaker, even if the bonds were issued at a higher interest cost, the failure to enact the amendments will materially increase execution risk for any transaction. And that's how bad it is. Speaker, we've been further advised that the worst case outcome is that due to the nature of many of the legal risks under the 2015 Act that was passed by the PLP, investors may simply decline to invest in the bonds, or rating agencies decline to rate it, meaning that the bonds will not issue.
Don't let them, don't take them off.
The Speaker, there's almost no section, Mr. Speaker. You know, Cat Island, I would never say such a thing to you. I would never say such a thing to you. Cat Island, I would never say such a thing to you. I always say that you're my friend. I would never say such a thing to you. Please don't do that. Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island. Honourable member.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Speaker.
Wait for the chair recognition. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rumkins, and Salvador.
And Mr. Speaker, thank you for recognizing me. I invite the minister to support the assertion he makes. Right, that the terms of the rate reduction bond passed in 2015, right, was not acceptable to the market. Right? Was not acceptable to the market, upon which he's facing that. Otherwise, he ought to withdraw it. Because he ought to know the records and the files will show. The participants who had already agreed to participate in it. We did not get scared.
I saw the record.
No,
I saw the record.
I know what you see. I know where I was. I know.
Pulling the trigger.
No. I know what I did. And I was a judge. I know what I did. No, I know what I did.
You were bordering on the line. That's why you're on the line. That's why on the line. That is the definition of black. You know what you mean by bordering.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Kamaikan.
Speaker, let me say to my friend from Cat Island, and I want to say to my friend from Cat Island, I want everyone to know that, because notwithstanding the fact that we disagree on these issues, he's still my friend. Notwithstanding that, Speaker, Cat Island stood up and said something that I did not say. So let me repeat what I said. Let me repeat what I said. I asked you at the beginning to start taking notes. Mr. Speaker, based on the legal advice, if the recommended amendments are not made to this deficient legislation that the PLP passed, the best case outcome would be that the bonds are issued, but at a higher interest cost than would have been the case had the changes to the recommended act not been enacted. That would result in higher customer tariffs than might otherwise have been the case. Further, even if the bonds were issued at a higher interest cost, the failure to enact the amendments will materially increase execution risk for the transaction. We've been further advised that the worst outcome is that due to the nature of the many legal risks in the act that was passed by the PLP, investors might simply decline to invest in the bonds of rating agencies. Rating agencies may decline to rate it, meaning that the bonds would not issue. Speaker. Speaker, let me say on the public record, Cat Island is my friend. He'll always be my friend.
But you're wrong. I tell him he's wrong.
But he's
wrong.
He's made mistakes with this legislation. He's made serious mistakes with this legislation. Serious mistakes. And the best thing to do is to just admit we made some mistakes.
Admit that. Just admit it.
And go ahead and let's amend the legislation. Let's move ahead in the interest of the Bahamian people.
Don't hang your head.
Mr. Speaker, there's almost no section of this poorly drafted 2015 Act that doesn't have to be amended. Almost no section. So we had no choice but to throw the whole thing out.
Throw it out. Throw it back here.
Mr. Speaker, there's no reason for any of us to support keeping deeply flawed legislation on our books. And before members opposite can oppose it, and that's why I invited Cat Island, they must answer me. On their incompetence in passing legislation with multiple deficiencies in it, and tell the country why we must not repeal this excuse me, sir. Why we must not repeal this inadequate, poorly drafted, faulty, defective, and badly flawed legislation. While the follies and incompetence of the opposition excuse me, in trying to draft legislation 4 years ago has been exposed, they should be proud to see that as always, a caring FNM government has stepped forward to fix the problems that they created. And will soon make reliable, inexpensive power available to the Bahamian people for the first time in many years. In this respect, sir, I wish to thank the hard-working BPL chairman, Dr. Donovan Moxley and his board, consisting of Mr. Stephen Hollowesco, Ms. Deborah Wood, Ms. Vianna Gardner, Mr. Veron Bethel, Ms. Robin Ogilvie, and Mr. James Moss, as well as BPL CEO, Mr. Whitney Hasty, and the Rate Reduction Bond Board, consisting of Chairman Jeff Andrews, Larry Wilson, and Mrs. Tanya Carey. Excuse me, sir. Mr. Speaker, Carmichael supports this bill to repeal and replace the inadequate, deficient, faulty, defective, flawed, and ineffective PLP drafted electricity rate reduction bond. I so move.
Thank you, honorable member. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I start, allow me to congratulate the members of Atlantic School who are visiting here with us today. I want to reassure you that you are supported by this government. All the young people are the future. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to extend congratulations to the legends in sports, the women who were visiting us here this morning, and of course the Zonta Club, whom we support, and we want to reassure them that the government will do all it can to ensure that violence in the workplace and violence in the homes generally decrease. And as far as women having to engage in sexual favors for advancement in the workplace, Mr. Speaker, we will eradicate that and ensure that those male beasts are placed where they rightfully deserve. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas has been good to many generations of Bahamians. Many of us count ourselves among those fortunate to be sons and daughters of this blessed country. For my part, I came from humble beginnings from over the hill. I was able to get a good education and was raised with the values and of hard work, sacrifice, and savings. From that good early education, I was able to go on and do my undergraduate degree and then my training at the University of West Indies to become a medical doctor and a businessman. In whatever I achieved, it was always my objective to give back and to do my best to help improve the country that did so much for me. Giving back, Mr. Speaker, or paying it forward was something my parents, my teachers, and the church taught me. Life is best measured not in what you accomplish only for ourselves. Life is best measured in what we do for others. Mr. Speaker, one of the most vexing issues that has frustrated Bahamians for decades is the failure of the state to consistently generate and distribute sufficient electricity to consumers. We have heard promises from many officials over the years, but still, the state energy supplier has been unable to deliver, especially during peak demand season in the hot summer months. Because of the global climate emergency, our summers are hotter, our winters are colder, hurricanes are becoming stronger and deadlier because of our warm waters. And this summer was particularly burdensome, miserable, long and hot here in New Providence in terms of the blackouts that we had experienced. And nobody was spared, Mr. Speaker. Bahamas Power and Light, BPL, performed poorly. There were prolonged blackouts. There was extended and significant disruption to family life and to businesses. Bahamians, residents, and visitors to our shores deserve better. At the heart of the problem is that the infrastructure at BPL is terribly inadequate. There's no debate about that, Mr. Speaker. BPL's infrastructure is inadequate. The equipment is old, much of it older than the majority of Bahamians. Much of the equipment and infrastructure is way past its usefulness. And what compounds this problem is there has been inadequate maintenance. Like the human body, Mr. Speaker, machines run efficiently and last longer when they are properly maintained and taken care of. If you do not take care of your body over the years, including proper maintenance, such as exercise, when parts of the body break down, it becomes more expensive and difficult to repair. The same is true of cars, Mr. Speaker, airplanes, houses, and equipment and plants at BPL. Mr. Speaker, at BPL, old machines and inadequate electricity supply have led to too many additional costs. We have spent many millions as a country renting generators over the years because our supply could not meet our demand. Instead of fixing BPL, the country just
kept renting more and more generators. It was like putting Band-Aid on an injury or a large wound that needed radical surgery and a permanent, not temporary fix. Along with this equipment, crisis at BPL has been its financial crisis. The government of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, had to step in to back BPL's debt. Cash-strapped and burdened with debt, the structure of the energy supplier is woefully inadequate for it to make the necessary long-term investments to purchase and to maintain the equipment and resources to provide quality, sustainable service. There are other hard facts, Mr. Speaker. Decades of short-term decision-making, poor choices, and in some instances, corruption have brought BPL to its knees. What we witnessed this summer was a symptom of a poor legacy of a collapse that started at BPL many, many years ago. Mr. Speaker, my government made a decision to stop making any more short-term decisions when it came to BPL and to energy generation and distribution in our country. We decided that we had to fix this problem here and now. We are not like the party on the other side. When in office, they talk and promise. They shuffle and bluff. They prance and they dance, but deliver nothing or little. They are good at wasting money on things like Carnival, on which they spent millions rather than investing in BPL. But, Mr. Speaker, they are so poor at spending the money needed to address certain problems. Our priorities, Mr. Speaker, are different, which is why we cancel all that spending on a weekend party while Bahamians were in need of better health facilities, better education, and better electricity generation and supply. And after coming to office in 2017, the FNM commissioned here in New Providence the construction of the largest single power plant in the country's history. After coming to office in 2017, the FNM commissioned here in New Providence the construction of the largest single power plant in the country's history. The 132 megawatt station is scheduled to come online next month. And this is a part of a broader energy strategy to add 200 plus megawatts of power to New Providence. Part of our plan, Mr. Speaker, is the addition of natural gas to the fuel mix. This is cheaper, it is cleaner, and it is cleaner generally. It is cleaner fuel than the heavy fuel we rely on today. The use of heavy fuel has contributed to environmental damage at Clifton Fair, damage the government is committed to cleaning up. Mr. Speaker, the repair and fixing of BPL is essential. Since 1999, we have been plagued with environmental and contamination, marine contamination at our Clifton Pier water facility. As a result of that, the residents in the Adelaide community were complaining while swimming in Adelaide. They were swimming in oil. The residents of Albany complained that their investment was in danger, and mega yachts that came to visit Albany, their hull was bathed with oil. Stewart's Cove complained that their businesses were in danger because the guests were complaining of the oil, and our coral reefs were being destroyed. Mr. Speaker, that would result in an economic disaster and a true meltdown of our economy. We recognize that and are making provisions to have it fixed. Mr. Speaker,
What the oil that was in the ground?
when you get up, if you miss and say that, I got more information, but time not gonna allow. Our energy reform strategy, Mr. Speaker, also includes the incorporation of renewable energy into the electricity grid. BPL is committed to the government's target of 30% renewables by 2030 by placing solar in various family islands. Inagua, Bimini, Andres, and Eleuthera are targeted during the first wave of solarization. Requests for proposals were issued, and bids are currently being evaluated. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that new generation equipment will help stabilize our energy problems. However, to comprehensively move forward and to end this instability at BPL, we must pay for the expenditures of the past and raise new funds to ensure the power stays on in the future. Just like I said to those young people that we must protect their future. BPL will protect our future generation. This is the purpose of this electricity rate reduction bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to divert and point out that many say that our electricity cost is too high. We can reduce that cost overnight. Those that pay $300 a month, we can reduce that cost by an additional $35. But that would mean removing the subsidy from the family islands. Some family islands, Mr. Speaker, like the southern family islands, their electricity bill would increase by 50%. The bill that's paid in Inagua, Crooked Island, Long Island, Acklands, their bill would move from $700 to $1,050. And Mr. Speaker, the bills in Abaco would subsequently increase by 35%. Those in Eleuthera and Exuma would likewise increase. But Mr. Speaker, that was why, I wonder why, if that was the reason why the former government was reluctant in electrifying all the family islands, because they knew that subsidy would be required, but was the F&M that took that task on and completed it. BPL, Mr. Speaker, has $321 million of legacy debt, and it needs to raise millions more for its future. So I ask the question, do we allow our engines to stop? Do we allow our economy to collapse? And do we allow rentals to continue? Consumers will pay a fee to cover these costs, Mr. Speaker. There's been much discussion of this point, and no one likes new costs. But as a mature, independent democracy, we must be realistic as to how development and progress take place. When money is borrowed from lenders to pay for equipment of the past, that money has to be paid back. The Bahamas is known internationally as a country that pays back the funds it borrows. We do not default on or fail to pay back what we have borrowed. In order to purchase new equipment, we have to pay for that also. No one wants the events of this summer in New Providence to be repeated. For that to be prevented, Mr. Speaker, we must invest heavily in new equipment, software, and facilities of the future. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine today, BPL is still using floppy disks? Most people that they don't know. With the addition of cleaner, cheaper fuel and more efficient generators that consume less energy, it is expected that the cost of electricity will go down. We are seeking to make the difficult decisions now to ensure a better and cheaper energy future for all Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, the side opposite went down this road, and they knew what had to be done. However, because election was approaching, they decided to kick the can down the road and not endanger their possibility of losing an election. They preferred, Mr. Speaker, to demonstrate self-satisfaction and protect themselves as opposed to protecting our future. DPF. They are a self-serving group, Mr. Speaker. And one must sometimes make decisions that are in the best interest of the country and not the best interest of themselves. Today, Mr. Speaker, this decision would protect a future generation, would protect our economy, would add additional confidence to investors so that more investors would come. More second homeowners would come and help develop our country, as opposed to sacrificing that development just to ensure that we protect ourselves. That's the difference between us and them, Mr. Speaker. This is the same group, listen closely, Exuma and Ragged Island, because I know you should have been on this side, but listen. This is the same group who, when last in office, made no meaningful large-scale investment in equipment and infrastructure in BPL. They left the state energy supply in a state of collapse. The minister responsible for BPL during their watch was the now leader of the opposition. They do not know how to fix problems, or they're afraid. In this case, they were afraid. They knew. They have the same information we have. They knew, but they were afraid. They do not know how to make difficult decisions, or they are afraid. The practice of the side opposite is to promise everything and to say to the people, you can have it for free. Let us all remember, Mr. Speaker, let us all remember that it was the PLP that made the most delusional policy suggestion during the last election campaign. Remember, they said they would make electricity free for all kinds of consumers. Commentators laughed at them the Bahamian people laughed at them. And even Exuma at that time was laughing at them. But our people have more sense than that. The PLP's pledge was foolishness designed to get votes. It failed. And fixing BPL's problem comes at a cost. There is no magic formula to buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment. You have to pay for it. To keep the lights on and to have stable service now and in the future requires investment. Mr. Speaker, the opposition is the party of endless kicking the can down the road. The problems we inherited at BPL were similar to those we inherited at the New Providence landfill. When we came to office, landfill fires were at crisis level. They could not fix the problem. They did not fix the problem. Talk, and inaction are what they are about. On coming to office, we created a plan and we executed our plan. The landfill is now on the way to being transformed. The same thing, Mr. Speaker, is happening with BPL. Within this single term in office, we are fixing the landfill and we will fix BPL. Something the PLP utterly failed to do under two Christie administrations. While the PLP jives and talks, we are fixing big problems in order to move the Bahamas forward. Mr. Speaker, stabilizing BPL is essential to ensuring the well-being of the Bahamian economy now and in the future. They are always more concerned about themselves. They're concerned, Mr. Speaker, about winning an election, while we are concerned about protecting a future and a generation. The high cost of electricity and BPL's poor service, slow investment, and make quality service delivery more difficult for businesses. The on and off services also damages and destroy equipment in businesses and residences. And too many Bahamians have lost appliances and equipment because of poor outages. For our country to grow, we need BPL to be able to expand its generational capacity. We have a growing tourist and resort industry. We have a growing port and cruise industry. As we add more hotel rooms and amenities, as we welcome in more cruise ships and boaters, as local businesses expand and grows, we need to be able to supply all of them with reasonably priced, reliable power supply. The Bahamas cannot maximize its growth potential if BPL is allowed to remain as it is. Speaker, as we are doing now at BPL, cleaning up the mess left by the other side is something this party, this FNM party government, has become expert at. It began in 1992, when the excesses of the drug era under their first leader left many lives in the country's reputation in ruins. The economy was in terrible shape. We had to fix the economy. They maintained absolute control over the broadcast media. We liberated the broadcast media. We restored honest government investment return. We invested in critical infrastructure, the length and breadth of the country. The economy, Mr. Speaker, returned to growth. In this term, we came to office with a debt mess left by that side. The country's finances were in terrible shape. There was stagnation in the economy. Borrowing was out of control. And as the Minister of Finance set out in the Fiscal Strategy Report last week, in the 2 years leading up to Hurricane Dorian, the government was successful in its fiscal consolidation. We reduced the deficit from $660 million in 2016-17 fiscal year to $212.8 million in the 2018-19 fiscal year. This was the lowest deficit recorded in nearly a decade. And history will show that our discipline and prudence was just what was needed at just the right time. Our discipline and good management of the people's finances, Mr. Speaker, gave us the room we needed to use now to borrow and help Bahamians in need. And Hurricane Dorian devastated or decimated parts of Abaco, the Abaco Keys, and the Grand Bahama. It will take years to rebuild and to restore the lives of those affected. Our administration plans to borrow $507.9 million to assist with the effects of Dorian. We are faced with a historic crisis. Bahamians need help. The government, Mr. Speaker, will be there to help rebuild and to restore at every step of the way. I read in the Tribune a ridiculous commentary from the PLP. The leader of the opposition was quoted as saying at his Sunday press conference related to this borrowing that, I quote, "We are on a fiscal cliff, falling. There is a financial crisis that we think is looming and looming large." Mr. Speaker, utter nonsense. From a base of stability and growth before the storm, led by this administration, we now have the room to responsibly borrow to help those in need. It would be a sad day in the Bahamas. It would be a sad day in the Bahamas if the opposition opposed government borrowing to help Bahamians who lost everything in a natural disaster.
Honorable member.
Speaker, I just lost time. I need my 5 minute back. Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad. I respectfully concur. May I have an additional 5 minutes? Thank you.
Honorable member, we have 10 minutes to lunch.
Oh, well, I might as well go for lunch. Go straight through.
Take it to lunch. Very good.
Oh, Jesus. I have to go back now. Not yet, though. It would be a sad day. Mr. Speaker, it'd be a sad day. Be a sad, though no longer surprising day if they turn their backs on our people who are in need. This would be a terrible example of a lack of compassion, of empathy, of solidarity with those in need of hope and rebuilding. I guess this is the sort of mindset we can expect from someone who during the crisis of Hurricane Dorian would drive a big truck through Pinewood Gardens with a big PLP flag pushing more floodwaters into the people's home than even Dorian did. But the PLP's opposition to us helping Bahamians would not surprise us. The opposition's initial reaction to whatever we do to benefit Bahamians is to oppose it. Mr. Speaker, BPL must and will change. It must be set on a path of self-resilience and sustainable growth. Through this bond restructure process, we seek to move away from the need for government backing of BPL's debt to a position where the organization can take care of itself. Many have had a hand in the state energy supplier's failure over decades. And during this administration, we are making tough decisions to right this important part of our state and our economy. We have had to make unpopular decisions, but we have done so to improve the lives of our people, including laying the groundwork for a more productive and dynamic economy. We are doers, Mr. Speaker, not talkers.
Amen.
Who fail to act. We act boldly. Mr. Speaker, we act boldly. We do not fear disrupting the dysfunctional status quo. If Bahamians want problems to linger and to hear sweet words that do not solve anything, then they should listen to the empty promises and empty words of the other side. They are masters at all of that. But if you want change, Mr. Speaker, if you want reform, if you want growth, if you want progress,
Amen.
the policies of this side are for the Bahamian people. Mr. Speaker, as a medical doctor, I have been trained, and I have spent my life addressing medical problems, including matters of life and death. I have been trained to act and not just simply talk in the face of an emergency or problems.
You ain't going nowhere.
Some have been trained to litigate or talk at a problem for years on end, often with no resolution or solution. Through practice, some have become expert at shuffling and waffling. In my field, talk alone does not save lives or heal bodies or make people better. It is through action.
Action.
And not empty words that human life is made better.
You agree, right?
The PLP is the party of talk.
Talk.
And empty promises, which leave problems unsolved.
Any problem.
The FNM is the party of action. We are the party, Mr. Speaker, of solutions. Including the big problems of our country.
Amen.
The dump was a big problem.
Yeah.
The environmental disaster in Clifton Pier was a big problem.
Fix it.
BPL is a big problem.
You can fix that too.
But today, the party of action will solve all problems. Your airport opening up, I believe, this week.
It's opening. It's opening.
Mr. Speaker.
You gotta keep up with the time.
Mr. Speaker, I put my hand to my heart for a reason. As a physician and as Prime Minister, I took oath to heal and to help. That oath I take seriously. The time to talk about things like BPL, the New Providence landfill, free access to education and other issues is long past. We are now in a season of action, Pine Ridge, and I know you agree.
Boy, he liking this today. You're all smart.
We are now in a season of action, results and problems fixed by a decisive, determined government. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I want to remind the people in the Family Island that the FNM made a determination to ensure that they were electrified. The PLP recognized that electrifying them would be an additional cost subsidy to those in New Providence.
Yes.
We took that challenge on because they are our brothers and sisters.
Yes. We are one Bahamas.
We made that sacrifice. We are one Bahamas.
One Bahamas.
And they can be assured that we will not abandon.
No.
The subsidy.
You like that, right, Mark?
The subsidy that they receive, every Bahamian throughout New Providence, those in the inner cities, in Barnabas, Baintown, everybody make a contribution to subsidize Auckland's to ensure that their quality of life remain. To subsidize Crooked Island, Abaco, Eleuthera, Inagua. And Mr. Speaker, if we want to be selfish like they are, we can remove that subsidy and our light bills will fall immediately. $300 that we pay will immediately decrease by $35. By $35 here in New Providence. If you pay $600, your light bill will automatically decrease by $70. But what it means,
We gotta look out for it.
what it means is while the quality of life further improves in New Providence, the quality of life in Auckland, whose light bill would move from $700 to $1,050, will decrease.
That's why we
The economy would collapse.
Y'all lose the
Crooked Island will suffer the same. Meguana would suffer the same. Exuma would move from 700 to 1,000. Eleuthera would increase. But Mr. Speaker, we, the FNM, we know that the Bahamian people is prepared to make that sacrifice rather than sacrificing their brothers and sisters in the southern and other family islands.
What if I was loving this
Mr.
today?
Speaker.
I know what you did. I don't know what you did, lady.
I second this legislation in order to fix a major problem which the country can no longer ignore. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And allow me to close by saying to my brothers in Baintown, Farm Road, Bentonville, Kalani, and all throughout New Providence, thank you for making the sacrifice so that Auckland's Crooked Island and our other family islands can survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. Honorable members, a bill for an act to repeal and replace the Electricity Rate Reduction Bond Act of 2015 to refine the legal framework for the issuance and redemption of securitized rate reduction bonds. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for the Exumas, Ragged Island, the Exumas and Ragged Island. The chair now recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
I yield to Honorable.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Carmichael.
Speaker, I'm grateful that you yielded. I just want 1 minute, and that is for the sake of clarity, for those who did not, who misheard me, or those who deliberately have misheard me. I spoke to $70 million for Wärtsilä Phase 2. And I specifically said that, and I specifically said 90 megawatts. I did not speak to the current Wärtsilä plant. I specifically said that. Thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, I move at this time that the business of the House do suspend for the luncheon break and that we return at 3 p.m. today's date.
Second. Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend to 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All right.